Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and today's video is brought to you by Deus Ex. I love Deus Ex. Deus Ex is the best game ever, and I must have said it so fast that I think I might have tripped YouTube's little demonetization. I might even think this video is a little too spicy, but I don't really care about that. Actually, what I care about is possibly the future of one of my favorite little cyberpunk gaming franchises. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to start off with, okay, Square Enix, let's get into the humble beginnings of Japan's version of Activision, okay? Now, Square Enix has been around for a long time. It's been in Squaresoft and Enix. Back in the days when Final Fantasy was a humble little series, you know, Final Fantasy VII dropped on the old PlayStation 1, that was made by Squaresoft. In fact, Enix was their competitor who was making games like Dragon Quest, arguably Japan's most favorite video game franchise, period. One of the most popular ones out there. Why did they have to merge? Well, Squaresoft at the time wanted to make a bunch of movies like Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. And to be fair with you, Enix was pretty reluctant joining their forces with Square because Square and Soft was actually losing a bunch of money over it. Square had a fascination with movies, but ladies and gentlemen, eventually what had actually happened was Sony Corp purchased a portion of their stock, a portion of their company by Square, and then after Final Fantasy X Kingdom Hearts, when the finances started to normalize a little bit, you know, when the PlayStation 2 era began and they actually started to get some really good operating margins, at that point, Square and Enix actually fully fleshed out the plan that they had before to fully merge. And once they merged, Square Enix was born and became one of the largest Japanese megacorps when it comes to gaming and entertainment. Now, of course, as many multinational companies go, they have a substantial, or I guess they used to have a pretty substantial, American development team, okay? A lot of back and forth that goes on. Now, back in the days of the early PC gaming era, we had games like Deus Ex, like Thief, and whatnot, even Tomb Raider, and a lot of those games were owned by companies known as Eidos Interactive. Later companies like Crystal Dynamics would come into the picture, and of course, Square Enix decided to buy those companies. Now, back in the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 era, a lot of these companies were really tapped into to make games like Deus Ex Human Revolution, one of my favorite games ever made. Games like Tomb Raider, Tomb Raider's Rise of the Tomb Raider, and then Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And then moving on forward, they made plenty of games, one game in the Thief franchise. Of course, let it be known that Square Enix also owned the amazing Hitman re-releases, not re-releases, the Hitman games that came out a few years ago. The only negative aspect of those games being the fact that they're so tied to an online-only framework. Now, because of AAA gaming and a little bit of mismanagement, let's be real, there was some mismanagement, these companies grew up so massively in size and scope to the point where I believe Eidos Interactive had like 500-something employees working at it, so it wasn't even just mismanagement, it's just too big of a company at that point to even operate just under one person, under like a normal operating understanding, because you have so much money that constantly is needed to feed the beast, if you will. Now here, Square Enix Holdings Limited basically signed a share transfer agreement to Sweden-based Embracer Group. Now before we continue, Embracer Group, for those of you who don't know, is not just a small little company that came out of nowhere. No. Embracer Group was founded in 2011, and they have one little nice shiny thing in common. They just buy IPs. They just buy everything. Remember back when THQ was falling down and games like Saints Row were up in the air? Yeah, this is the same company that just kept on acquiring IPs. But anyways, let's go on. The company's primary assets to be divested in the transactions are group subsidiaries known as Crystal Dynamics, the developers of Tomb Raider, Eidos Interactive, the developers of Deus Ex, Guardians of the Galaxy, and also Marvel Avengers. Woo! And IPs such as Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, Thief, and Legacy of Kain. Now, Legacy of Kain is a really important one. The last release in that franchise was 2003. Comparatively, Deus Ex was pretty close, being that I think it was like 5-6 years ago since Mankind Divided. Of course, Tomb Raider recently had, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and Thief? We haven't seen a fucking Thief game since the launch of the PlayStation 4. That was a cross-generation PS3, PS4 release. You know how hard that makes me? That Thief might potentially get looked at, maybe, hopefully, because it's probably one of the granddaddies of stealth action games, and I am a stealth action crack whore. Now, of course, what is the purpose of the transactions? The transaction will assist the company in adapting to the change underways in the global business environment, get this, by establishing a more efficient allocation of resources, which will enhance corporate value by accelerating growth in the company's core businesses in the digital entertainment domain. In addition, the transaction enables the launch of new businesses by moving forward with investments in fields including blockchain, AI, and the cloud. The move is based on a policy of business structure optimizing that the company set forth under the medium-term business strategy unveiled on May 13th, 2021. So again, yes, they have decided to sell off for around $300 million some of the best, most well-known gaming IPs, you know, real juggernauts, in my opinion, for $300 million, and we'll find out why $300 million in a bit, just to invest in the blockchain, AI, and the cloud. Yeah. However, they didn't sell every single IP out there. For instance, they have Outriders, which recently just came out. They have that. Life is Strange, which is incredibly popular for people who are into, like, you know, what is it, the narrative sort of simulator games. And they kept Just Cause because... Just cause. I hate myself. Now, again, in this list, if you look at the revenue, they've certainly earned a lot of money in 2021, but the operating income, which normally would be funds that are converted from like revenue into what the company would eventually see as profits, actually pins the number at around somewhere to the ballpark of 0.6% return on investment on these companies. So again, Square is not actually making a lot of money off of these companies at all, making the games as they currently do. And the same could be said for Eidos Interactive. So while these companies make a lot of money every year, they're not making profits enough to justify keeping them within the group. Remember what I said earlier. These teams have gotten massive, like 500 something close member teams, okay? Big, massive studios hosted in places where the operating costs are frankly too high, okay? Even they're not really releasing enough games every year on year to justify keeping this underneath from a business perspective. Now, again, I have to imagine that for Square Enix, the most important thing for them is keeping the Japanese branch alive and well, being that they're a Japanese company, right? Now, obviously, it's easy to throw Deus Ex under the bus, and they've been doing it year after year, okay? It's not like they haven't treated these companies well in advance. For instance, even when you look at games like Avengers, which they just recently released, right? A game that's been out for a year plus, a game that could have been great, okay? If they decided to just stick with the single-player faction, they had an amazing IP that people would have jumped into, and instead they turned it into a live service game where they focused more on the microtransactions and the battle passes, and obviously that's going to rub the community the wrong way. It was the butt of jokes for many. What could have been a game that people have bought, downloaded, played, co-opted with their friends, and you know what? If the game is good enough, they probably would have jumped into post-release content, DLC if you will. Instead, they hampered that release and fucked sales up, and I believe that's purely a company level. Even from the perspective of a Deus Ex fan, they screwed up that franchise too. For instance, this is supposed to be like a trilogy of releases, yet all of a sudden we've stopped at Deus Ex Mankind Divided, leaving Adam Jensen's story arc, for those of you interested, completely left open. There's actually no continuation. Now, if you've played Mankind Divided, you've also realized that by the time you get to the end of the game, it sort of just ends. Like, it's one of those games that's almost reminiscent of Metal Gear Solid 5, where the ending just comes. No real fanfare, just sort of leaves a lot of loose ends open, and basically sets the game up for a sequel that never actually ended up coming. But even then, even beyond all of that, you know, mismanagement, the other big problem was from the start they were focusing on the wrong things, such as pre-order bonuses, like, you know, you could customize your own pre-orders or augment your pre-orders, if you will. But also they were interested more on monetizing the game super hard. And I'm not just talking about DLC expansions. Those I think are fine, especially if you make them like after the game's release. Extra single-player content is always great for a nice price. But they were trying to sell you literal Praxis credit packs to this day in the game. You know the actual instruments you need to progress the game? Yeah, you could literally pay your way to the most overpowered character right from the start. Why the fuck would I use this option when Cheat Engine is sitting there, nice and free, implemented into a single-player game where I'm not even harming anybody. They even focus on a multiplayer component that they left half-assed as well. This game was the definition of half-assed. It's a great game. I like this game. But it's actually a game where if you play it, you're going to get the biggest blue balls in the world because Square Enix didn't want to see a completed product through. Especially hurts a lot given the fact that the last game in that franchise, Human Revolution, was such a great time that because of how impressive that title was, they actually decided to take the extra risk onto Mankind Divided and then fucked this up. And of course, this could ring true for any franchise they release in the North American branches. Instead of focusing like Sony would on big, nice IPs with strong single-player components that people remember, people get awarded, they decided we're just going to half-ass really good single-player IPs, and then all of a sudden when they fail, you're going to pretend to be all shocked about it. Get the fuck out of here. In their minds, a perfect game, okay, would be something like GTA 5, okay, where the single player is such an amazing banger, okay, such a good time, such an amazing game at its core that they're able to release some online component or some live service component that can draw in billions of dollars every year, okay? A game that basically sustains itself beyond any comprehension. But of course, to do that, you have to make a good game, period. What Square was interested in was creating skeletons, basically frameworks of live service games, hoping one would take off, and then bam, all of a sudden, the revenues would speak for the roof. The actual profits that they'd be getting out of these companies would be amazing, because in their minds, it's cheaper to develop one good AAA game and hope that it pays itself year after year after year. And hey, if you can get 2, 3, 4 of them going all at the same time, even better. But of course, that didn't exactly play out the way that they wanted to, and ultimately these companies had to be sold off. Now, do I think that Embracer Group is actually going to do anything out of this? Well, let's look at Embracer for 1 second, okay? Embracer, for instance, has bought several studios over the year. Obviously, we looked at THQ Nordic, but do you know they bought Saber Interactive, basically a port god studio, for around $525 million, from what I recall. Gearbox Entertainment, yeah, the people who make Borderlands and Tiny Tina, that's bought for around $1.3 billion. Fucking Easy Brain was bought for, I believe, around $640 million as far as my notes goes. What does Easy Brain make that's worth $640 million to Embracer Group? Well, if you look down the list, they've made Sudoku.com, Killer Sudoku, Nanogram.com. I feel like these are the same goddamn games, okay? Hey, pixel art, coloring on the internet, yeah, they're a Sudoku got company, Jigsaw Puzzles. But what's most important is, do you know that they have more than 1 billion downloads? Yeah, when you're trenched that deep into devices, your value speaks for itself. But of course, this is a company that just constantly buys everything in the game related. So what effectively just happened was one megacorp, Square Enix, sold off a pretty substantial amount of IP work to another megacorp, okay? Now, of course, in my opinion, this doesn't actually mean that these games are going to be seeing a resurgence, okay? Obviously, Embracer has said that they would like to produce more single-player, AAA quality titles, and I'm all for it. If that means that games like Thief, games like Deus Ex, games like Legacy of games like Legacy of Kain, games in this IP list, Tomb Raider, eventually end up seeing full realized AAA games that are good from a single-player perspective, I'm completely down on that. It's been a while since we've got any game from those franchises. And I would love to see an actual game development company, an actual game team actually be given the resources and the time to fully realize a product and release it. Because as time has proved, okay, single-player gaming is actually alive and well. We just had Elden Ring, and Elden Ring just slapped harder than my dad on a report card day. So you know what? All right, if single-player games are alive and well, then I have to say it's a really dumb deal from Square Enix to just give up these companies when they could potentially take a bit of a risk. And I know that's a tough thing to say in a business perspective, and actually try releasing more prominent AAA titles with restructuring their companies to the point where they're not actually going under on these development budgets. Because yes, there is an aura of mismanagement, but these teams are also massive. There needs to be some downsizing, some restructuring. But I'm sure if you can achieve that, you can actually make some really good AAA game titles and actually make a pretty good piece of coin out of it, okay? All it is just having the right people, the right mindset, rather than looking at everything from like, hey, how can we get year after year profits off of these one titles? How can we turn this AAA gaming sphere with dedicated hardcore gamers into something that, would be appealing to like a mobile gamer? It's almost like mobile gaming, right? The framework and profitability of mobile gaming is constantly being shoehorned in every capacity into actual AAA titles. And we've seen it, right? Like, games start getting more battle passes, way more microtransaction content into it, right? In fact, most of the popular games now, if you look at it just from Twitch streaming, are games that are in the multiplayer camp, popular multiplayer titles that succeed heavily off of constantly releasing micro pieces of content, so people are constantly shuffling money into it, driving player engagement and constantly keeping people fed in. But of course, there's also games, again, like Elden Ring, that create polished AAA single-player experiences that people still stick around to this day and end. That's pretty much what it comes down to. And to be real with you, I think Square Enix was really dumb giving up these companies. And I know that I must have said a lot, but there's just a lot to really process. Obviously, Square is more interested in their core franchises. Like, it's easy to fuck up Deus Ex, okay? Forget it. It's not something that we really own or began with. I mean, we owned it. We used to. We didn't begin with it. It's a different thing if Square Enix starts screwing up games like Dragon Quest, like Final Fantasy, okay? They're probably more invested in creating those single-player experiences for those titles that can actually generate them the profits that they want, instead of constantly releasing games like Tomb Raider and Deus Ex and wondering, wait, why doesn't this make enough money? Why doesn't this make the same money that Final Fantasy VII Remake did? I don't know, Square. I don't know. You tell me. But they ended up selling this off, and hopefully Embracer Group actually gives these developers, these publishing groups, these game devs some actual resources, some actual care and attention. Maybe it'll get led better. Maybe these games, maybe these franchises will actually have worthwhile successive series releasing in their branches. Who knows? But to be fair, I'm glad that anybody but Square Enix and the shit show that that company is owning any of these popular IPs. Because at the moment right now, I'll be honest with you, aside from Final Fantasy XIV Online, everything else at Square Enix seems like a trash fire. And hopefully, all right, that trash fire will lessen as the years come. That said, though, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.